The morning air was crisp as Lieutenant stepped onto the tarmac, her boots clicking softly against the concrete. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made people notice without even realizing it. The sun glinted off the fuselage of the military transport waiting for departure, a massive aircraft that looked far too big to be maneuvered with ease. Around her, fellow passengers hustled, talking loudly, checking their gear, and exchanging stories of previous missions. However, moved with precise calm, her eyes scanning the aircraft, noting every detail of the cabin, the seating arrangements, and the placement of emergency equipment. No one paid her much attention at first. She didn't carry herself like a decorated officer or boast about previous missions. She was quiet, almost invisible, sitting at the far end of the cabin and unpacking her small, sleek tablet. Her uniform was immaculate, her hair tucked neatly under her cap, and her demeanor serene, yet every movement was meticulous, almost ritualistic. To the casual observer, she was just another intelligence officer on routine assignment, another cog in the vast machinery of the Air Force. His eyes, however, betrayed something deeper. They were sharp, calculating, constantly observing. She scanned the other passengers, noting their expressions, their postures, their nervous habits. There were a few pilots in flight suits who laughed too loudly, and some enlisted personnel shifting nervously, clutching duffel bags and gear. Most were focused on mundane tasks, checking radios, reviewing flight plans, or talking among themselves. But attention was not scattered. She was already thinking ahead, anticipating every possible scenario that could occur during this flight. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her mind was working at a pace that made her quietness all the more intimidating. The crew began boarding and observed them with subtle scrutiny. She noticed the small details others would miss. The tension in the pilot's shoulders, the way the co-pilot's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted switches, the way the cabin lights flickered momentarily with each engine check. These were the signs of human stress, of individuals performing critical work under pressure. Filed them away mentally, understanding that in a crisis, these small signs could be the difference between smooth coordination and disaster. She didn't react. She only observed, prepared, waiting. As she settled into her seat near the rear of the aircraft, opened her tablet and began reviewing mission notes. Maps of the flight path, weather conditions, radar scans, and intelligence reports scrolled before her eyes. She noted anomalies, potential hazards, and points of interest that might affect their route. Her fingers moved swiftly, tapping calculations into her tablet, adjusting flight paths with precision. She wasn't talking to anyone. She didn't need to. Her work was silent but deadly effective, the type of intelligence that could save lives or endanger them if overlooked. Around her, the chatter of other passengers continued. One young airman tried to make small talk, joking about how boring long flights could be, smiled faintly, polite but distant, not engaging more than necessary. She had no need for idle conversation. Her focus was on the mission, on the aircraft, and on the invisible threads of danger that could intersect with this routine flight at any moment. Even the casual observer would sense there was something about her, a quiet energy that hinted at skill and experience far beyond the ordinary. When the engines roared to life and the transport began taxiing down the runway, his eyes lifted briefly to the window. The aircraft lurched forward with controlled power, the vibration thrumming through the cabin. She noticed the subtle shifts in weight distribution, the slight tilts of the fuselage as it picked up speed. Every motion, every sound was a data point. She noted the efficiency of the takeoff, the smoothness of the climb, and the faint turbulence brushing against the wings. To most passengers, it was just another flight. It was a series of variables that needed constant monitoring. Her attention shifted when she heard the faint crackle over the intercom. The crew was running routine checks, but there was a small, almost imperceptible pause before the co-pilot replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. It was nothing overt, but her instincts picked up the subtle anomaly. In situations like these, she knew the smallest detail could escalate quickly. His fingers moved over her tablet again, logging the observation and preparing contingency plans in her mind. She didn't alert anyone yet. The situation didn't warrant it. Her calm patience was part of her skill, knowing when to act and when to observe. It was during this quiet moment that someone jokingly over the radio mentioned call sign, Shadow Hawk. The voice was casual, playful, meant as nothing more than a minor acknowledgement, yet the response was immediate. A few pilots nearby stiffened, eyes widening ever so slightly. Shadow Hawk. The name carried weight, though no one on the transport fully realized why. Herself didn't react. She didn't need to. The name alone signaled experience, precision, and a reputation forged in missions that few knew about. Missions where lives depended on intelligence, observation, and split-second decision-making. As the aircraft climbed higher, the sun rising over distant mountains, closed her tablet for a moment and looked out the window. The landscape stretched endlessly below, a patchwork of valleys, forests, and rivers. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also unpredictable, dangerous. Her mind mapped potential flight paths, escape routes, and alternate strategies, preparing for a mission that had yet to truly begin. Around her, passengers relaxed, unaware of the storm, literal and metaphorical, that could descend upon them. His quiet presence masked a mind ready to shift the tide of events before anyone even knew danger was near. The engines hummed steadily, the cabin filled with a gentle vibration. Returned to her tablet, resuming calculations, reviewing intelligence, plotting contingencies. She was quiet, unassuming, a passenger in name only. Outside, the world moved unaware, but inside that cabin, the calm, precise, and ever-observant Shadow Hawk was preparing, ready for the moment when her skills would transform from silent calculation to life-saving action. The quiet hum of the engines was suddenly punctuated by the faint, insistent blip of the radar. His head lifted almost imperceptibly, eyes narrowing as she scanned the display in front of her. The transport's instruments flickered, highlighting several fast-moving objects converging along their flight path. Her fingers traced their projected routes, calculating speed, angles, and potential threat levels. The other passengers were oblivious at first, murmuring softly, unaware of the danger creeping toward them. Every heartbeat mattered, every second counted. A junior crew member, glancing at the radar screen for the first time, exclaimed nervously, "What are those?" His voice cracked, betraying the tension in the cabin. Didn't speak immediately. Her gaze remained locked on the data, parsing trajectories and analyzing the likelihood of interception. She had trained for moments like this, though rarely had she encountered an actual mid-flight threat with civilians aboard. Calmly, she raised her voice just enough to be heard over the low hum of the engines. "Stay calm. We'll handle this. Follow instructions." Her words had an almost hypnotic effect on the crew. Panic, though brewing, slowed as they recognized the quiet authority in her voice. Fingers moved deftly across her tablet, adjusting calculations in real time. She noted the enemy object's speed, direction, and probable engagement windows. Each blip represented a potential collision, a missile, or worse, a catastrophic interception. His eyes flicked to the ceiling, then to the pilots, noting the micro-expressions of stress. She understood them. She had been in countless exercises and real operations where a single misjudgment could lead to disaster. Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, two F-22 Raptor pilots, Captain Mason and Lieutenant, were already scrambling. Their jet engines roared, cutting through the morning sky as they tracked unidentified aircraft entering U.S. airspace. Their radios crackled with chatter, but a familiar call sign suddenly stopped them mid-sentence. "Shadow Hawk." Both pilots stiffened. Mason's jaw tightened, exchanged a quick glance, eyes wide. Shadow Hawk. That name carried weight in the fighter community. A legend in intelligence operations, known for analyzing patterns, predicting threats, and orchestrating near-impossible maneuvers. If Shadow Hawk was on the transport, this was no routine flight. His voice cut through the tension again, crisp, calm, and precise. "Two contacts, bearing 45, speed increasing. Maintain heading until further instructions. Evasive maneuvers will be coordinated. Trust your instruments." The crew obeyed instinctively. Even the most nervous airman whose hands trembled adjusted his controls. His analytical mind processed every detail: the aircraft's weight, wind currents, the proximity of the fast-moving objects. The tiny adjustments she suggested were like threading a needle at 30,000 feet. Outside, the F-22 pilots followed the signals coming from Shadow Hawk, intrigued by the precision and confidence emanating from a figure they had barely seen since training exercises years ago. Minutes passed like hours. The radar blips moved closer, their speed increasing exponentially. The transport shuddered slightly as it encountered turbulence, amplifying the passengers' unease. The mind remained focused. She anticipated the enemy craft's maneuvers before they occurred. Adjust vector 5 degrees starboard, altitude shift in 3 seconds. Ready now. The crew, the aircraft tilting smoothly to avoid potential interception. Outside, the enemy blips adjusted course, falling into patterns had predicted with near-perfect accuracy. The passengers began to realize something extraordinary was happening. The quiet, seemingly ordinary officer had turned into the center of command. Her tablet displayed trajectory adjustments, predicted movements, and calculated escape windows. Each recommendation she gave was executed flawlessly by the pilots, avoiding potential disaster with precision. The air inside the transport was tense, filled with a mixture of fear and awe. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Who is she? How does she know all this? Didn't answer. She simply observed, calculated, and commanded, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. Outside, the F-22 pilots were now fully engaged. Mason and mirrored her instructions, adjusting their positions to shield the transport, their respect growing with each command. She's predicting their moves, how? Muttered under his breath. Mason nodded grimly, gripping his controls. Shadow Hawk's reputation had preceded her, but seeing it in action live was different. Her call sign wasn't just a name, it was authority, foresight, and deadly accuracy. The first real threat appeared, a fast-moving aircraft breaking formation, approaching the transport with alarming speed. Passengers gasped, gripping seats, some closing their eyes. Fingers danced across her tablet, finalizing calculations in milliseconds. Evasive maneuver, right wing 2 degrees, maintain speed. Now, the transport tilted slightly, narrowly avoiding a direct line of attack. The enemy aircraft overshot, forced into a corrective maneuver. Predictions had worked perfectly. The crew exhaled collectively, but's eyes remained sharp, scanning for the next anomaly. Her mind raced ahead, anticipating the next movement. Radar blips indicated 2 more fast-moving objects converging on their flight path. Analyzed each one, calculating vectors, probability of engagement, and escape windows. She coordinated with the transport pilots and the F-22 seamlessly. Shift vector 10 degrees, altitude plus 2,000 feet. Maintain formation, she commanded. Mason and followed instinctively, trusting the unseen intelligence officer. Even the most skeptical crew members realized that her quiet presence was the key to survival. As the morning sun climbed higher, painting the sky with brilliant light, remained calm, her focus unbroken. Passengers began to whisper her name, Shadow Hawk, recognizing finally that the quiet woman in the corner was orchestrating their survival. Outside, enemy aircraft were adjusting, confused by the seemingly impossible maneuvers. Inside, tension and awe intertwined, each passenger silently acknowledging her brilliance. Her quiet authority, her calm precision, and her unparalleled skill had transformed what could have been panic into a controlled, tactical response. By the time the immediate threat began to wane, his mind was already calculating next steps, secondary threats, and contingency paths. The transport had survived the first wave, thanks entirely to her foresight and calm authority. The passengers, once dismissive of the quiet woman among them, now stared with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Shadow Hawk was not just a call sign, it was a promise of precision, a shield against chaos, and a silent force capable of changing the course of events in midair. The roar of the F-22s echoed through the sky as Captain Mason and Lieutenant closed in on the transport. His voice came over the radio again, calm, measured, precise. Maintain your vector. They're adjusting for intercept, but their angles are predictable. Watch for the second wave at 2 o'clock. Mason exchanged a glance with, both recognizing the cadence of someone who had orchestrated similar operations before. Shadow Hawk wasn't just another officer. She was a strategist whose reputation preceded her. Her call sign alone was enough to command attention. Years earlier, during a classified exercise in the Nevada desert, had coordinated a simulated rescue mission involving multiple aircraft under extreme conditions. Even then, her quiet demeanor masked a mind capable of predicting every potential obstacle. Mason and had been young pilots then, skeptical of intelligence officers who rarely left the planning room. But had proven herself. She had maneuvered the hostile aircraft perfectly, preventing virtual disaster in a complex exercise designed to fail. Her precision and foresight had earned her the call sign Shadow Hawk, a title whispered with respect among pilots. Now, years later, those same pilots were witnessing her expertise live, over the radio in real time. His voice cut through the tension like a blade, guiding not just the transport, but also the F-22s that now formed a protective shield around it. Altitude shift plus 300 feet. Adjust vector 15 degrees starboard. I repeat, 15 degrees, she commanded. The pilots followed instinctively, trusting her instructions even as the enemy aircraft closed in. Her calculations were flawless, anticipating moves the aggressors hadn't even considered yet. Inside the transport, passengers and crew were beginning to notice the transformation. The previously anxious now moved with renewed confidence, following subtle cues. She directed the co-pilot's hands with short, precise instructions and adjusted the cabin systems to stabilize the flight path. Every action seemed simple when spoke, but in reality, each command was the result of split-second calculations, probability assessments, and decades of experience condensed into mere words. One wrong step could have been catastrophic, yet guided them as if she were choreographing a dance. Mason and marveled at her clarity under pressure. She's predicting their maneuvers before they even execute them, muttered, gripping his controls tightly. Mason nodded in grim agreement. Shadow Hawk wasn't just a name. It was a reputation, forged in countless operations where precision and intelligence determined life or death. Now, that same reputation was saving the lives of every passenger in the transport below. The first enemy craft made a sudden adjustment, attempting a high-speed intercept. His voice was immediate, precise. 2 o'clock, adjust vector 5 degrees. Maintain speed now. The transport tilted gracefully, narrowly avoiding a direct line of attack. Gasps and murmurs filled the cabin but remained unflappable, scanning her tablet and instruments for the next anomaly. Outside, the F-22 pilots mirrored her actions, trusting her instructions without question. Shadow Hawk wasn't giving suggestions. She was orchestrating an aerial ballet of survival. As the minutes ticked by, the second wave of enemy aircraft approached. Their speed and formation indicated a coordinated attack, testing both the transport and the F-22s, anticipated each maneuver before it occurred, issuing concise instructions over the radio. Right wing 3 degrees, increase altitude 2,000 feet, maintain vector. The transport and F-22s responded as if in perfect synchrony. Every move predicted came to life in the airspace around them, turning a potential disaster into a tactical advantage. Passengers now whispered among themselves, astonished. The quiet, unassuming woman in the corner, who had barely spoken to anyone before takeoff, was guiding their survival with unmatched skill. One airman, still pale from the adrenaline, murmured, "I didn't think a single person could make that much of a difference." Offered a faint, reassuring smile, but her attention never wavered. She wasn't seeking admiration. Her focus was singular, keeping everyone alive. Shadow Hawk was never about recognition. It was about results. Mason and grew more impressed with each passing second. Shadow Hawk's analysis was seamless, integrating intelligence data with live flight conditions and enemy behavior. They executed maneuvers they had never practiced together in simulations, yet guidance made it intuitive. Every adjustment she suggested neutralized threats before they could escalate. The enemy craft faltered, confused by the precision and anticipation displayed by the seemingly passive passenger. It was clear to the pilots that Shadowhawk's quiet observation was transforming the situation entirely. The transport crested a ridge, sunlight glinting off the wings, casting sharp shadows across the cabin. Continued to issue instructions, each one carefully measured, guiding both aircraft and pilots with flawless execution. Outside, the enemy's coordination began to break down. They were no longer the aggressors. They were reacting, scrambling to adjust to a strategist who had already anticipated their every move. Shadowhawk had shifted the balance of power, turning potential panic into a controlled, tactical environment. Finally, the first wave of threats began to recede, forced to abandon their approach. The F-22 pilots maintained a protective perimeter, eyes scanning for any further danger, whilst calm voice continued to provide guidance. Passengers and crew now watched her with awe, realizing that the quiet woman among them had just orchestrated their survival. Mason and shared a brief nod of respect. Shadowhawk had not only commanded attention, she had earned it in real time under the most intense pressure imaginable. The transport leveled out, the immediate danger passing, yet its vigilance remained unwavering. She knew this was only the first of many challenges the flight could face. Passengers whispered her name quietly among themselves, Shadowhawk. No longer just a call sign, it was a symbol, a promise of skill, composure, and unmatched intelligence. Remained calm, her focus unbroken, ready to guide them through whatever came next. Her quiet authority had transformed fear into action and recognition into respect. The transport now drifted closer to the edge of restricted airspace, a no-fly zone carved out for national security purposes. Eyes flicked from her tablet to the instruments, analyzing every nuance of altitude, speed, and trajectory. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but's mind worked faster, calculating vectors and predicting movements that no ordinary pilot could anticipate. Outside, the mountains stretched in jagged lines, their peaks piercing low-lying clouds, shadows falling across the aircraft. Every feature of the terrain mattered, every gust of wind, every thermal current, every ridge that could alter flight patterns. The passengers' nerves were fraying. Murmurs filled the cabin, a mixture of curiosity and fear. A young enlisted airman whispered to his companion, "Why is she so calm?" He didn't know that had spent years operating in situations far deadlier than a mid-flight threat. Her quiet authority wasn't arrogance. It was honed instinct, experience, and intelligence that allowed her to process complex scenarios almost instantly. She didn't need to shout commands. Her clarity of thought and precise instructions were enough. From above, F-22 pilots Captain Mason and Lieutenant adjusted their formation, trusting calculations implicitly. The call sign Shadowhawk crackled over the radio once again. Mason's brow furrowed. "She's guiding both our flight paths and the transport's trajectory. I've never seen this kind of coordination in real time," he said, awe in his voice. Nodded, adjusting his jet to maintain the protective shield around the transport. Outside, enemy aircraft were approaching from unexpected angles, testing their defenses, but anticipated each move with unnerving accuracy. The radar blips on his tablet shifted rapidly. Two high-speed aircraft broke formation, attempting intercepts from flanking positions. Fingers flew over her tablet, recalculating positions and adjusting the transport's heading in milliseconds. Starboard shift 3 degrees. Increase altitude 2,000 feet. Maintain speed vector, she instructed, voice calm yet commanding. The pilots in the transport executed the maneuver flawlessly. Outside, the F-22s mirrored her adjustments, creating a synchronized dance of jets and transport weaving through potential danger zones. In the cabin, passengers stared, wide-eyed. No one had ever seen someone so quietly orchestrate such a complex situation. The hum of fear was replaced by awe, though anxiety still lingered. Glanced briefly at the passengers, assessing their readiness, their tension. Even in moments of extreme stress, She noted micro-expressions, subtle shifts in posture, small indicators of panic or uncertainty. Each observation informed the next set of instructions. Her mind wasn't merely processing flight data. It was integrating human behavior, aircraft mechanics, and enemy tactics simultaneously. The first enemy craft broke through the initial defensive vector, attempting to line up with the transport. Eyes tracked its speed, angle, and trajectory. "Evasive maneuver, right wing 5 degrees, descend 300 feet, she said crisply. The transport tilted smoothly, narrowly avoiding a lock-on. A collective gasp echoed through the cabin. Didn't react. Her attention immediately shifted to the next threat. One wave had been deflected, but 2 more enemy blips closed in from the east. Her mind raced, anticipating their behavior, predicting their moves before they even occurred. Outside, Mason and adjusted their formation once more. The F-22s became extensions of calculations, responding instantly to her guidance. "Shadowhawk has them under control," Mason muttered, exhaled, gripping his joystick with white-knuckled intensity. Every maneuver suggested forced the enemy to react, scrambling to match her anticipatory strategy. What should have been chaos, the transport surrounded by hostile aircraft, was now an orchestrated ballet of aerial precision. The passengers, sensing the shift, began to settle slightly, trusting in a calm they had never known in mid-flight danger. The mountains ahead presented a new complication. Narrow valleys and high ridges made evasive maneuvers riskier. Eyes tracked each potential path, calculating not just enemy interception but environmental hazards. "Maintain vector through the canyon, increase speed incrementally. Watch for turbulence from ridge winds," she instructed. The pilots executed each move with exact precision. Outside, the enemy aircraft struggled to adjust to the unpredictable but expertly calculated course. This ability to integrate terrain data with live enemy movements was what set her apart from any other officer, any other pilot. A sudden jolt shook the transport as turbulence hit the canyon walls. Passengers gripped their seats, white-knuckled and wide-eyed. A calm voice cut through the panic. "Steady, small corrections only. Trust the instruments, trust your training." The transport responded, tilting gracefully, avoiding collisions with gusts that could have easily sent the aircraft off course. The enemy aircraft, attempting aggressive pursuit, overshot twice, forced to correct, their formation faltering. Shadowhawk's anticipation had neutralized immediate danger, while maintaining the safety of every passenger aboard. Minutes stretched, every second a test of skill and nerve. Coordinated not just with the transport pilots but simultaneously with Mason and in their F-22s. Instructions flew over the comms, precise and unyielding. Altitude changes, vector shifts, minor course corrections, all synchronized perfectly with the pilots' real-time reactions. Outside, enemy craft began to lose cohesion, their attempts to intercept failing against a strategy they could neither predict nor counter. His reputation had transformed into tangible survival. The once quiet passenger was now the central force controlling the chaos. By the time the transport cleared the canyon, the immediate danger had diminished, though not entirely vanished. The passengers, once tense and fearful, now exchanged stunned glances, some whispering Shadowhawk's name with newfound reverence. Eyes scanned the instruments, her mind already calculating the next potential hazard, already planning the next defensive maneuver. Outside, the F-22 pilots maintained formation, glancing at each other in awe. Shadowhawk's quiet authority had orchestrated a high-stakes escape through a deathly landscape, seamlessly integrating human skill, technology, and tactical brilliance. As the cabin settled into relative calm, allowed herself the slightest exhale. Her hands returned to the tablet, reviewing data and anticipating further enemy movements. The passengers looked at her now with curiosity and respect, realizing that the quiet officer who had seemed so unremarkable moments ago had orchestrated a complex, life-saving series of maneuvers. Shadowhawk was no longer just a call sign. It was a symbol of precision, skill, and unmatched courage. Remained calm, her focus unwavering, fully aware that the mission was far from over. As the transport leveled out and the immediate threat faded, allowed herself a fleeting moment of reflection. Her fingers rested lightly on the tablet, though her mind raced with calculations for what might come next. Shadow Hawk, her call sign, wasn't just a name assigned by superiors or an arbitrary moniker. It carried decades of preparation, of missions executed flawlessly under extreme pressure. It was a reputation earned, tested in situations far deadlier than any passenger transport could imagine. And now, for the first time in this context, it was being observed in real time by pilots who had respected her from afar. Years ago had entered the Air Force with quiet determination. She wasn't loud, she didn't boast, and she didn't seek attention. Her skill spoke for itself. During training exercises, she displayed an uncanny ability to predict enemy maneuvers, often in scenarios designed to fail. In one exercise simulating a hostile intercept, guided multiple aircraft through a complex mountainous course. The senior pilots had doubted a young intelligence officer could manage such coordination, yet she did, flawlessly. That exercise earned her the call sign Shadow Hawk, a nod to her ability to strike swiftly and precisely from unseen positions. The name had stuck. In the world of military aviation, call signs weren't arbitrary. They were earned through skill, courage, and reliability under pressure. Shadow Hawk symbolized precision, foresight, and lethal intelligence. Over the years, had flown countless operations, often in the background, letting others take the spotlight while she quietly orchestrated success. Her calm demeanor and analytical mind made her a legend among pilots, though most never saw her face in the field. Those who had, like Mason, and remembered her instantly and respected her implicitly. Now, decades of training, exercises, and real-world missions converged in this moment. The transport, surrounded by potential threats, relied on her expertise as if her presence alone had shifted the odds. The passengers had been unaware of the significance of Shadow Hawk until now, watching in awe as one woman orchestrated their survival with precision, calm, and authority. His mind wasn't only focused on the immediate threats. She was integrating human behavior, flight mechanics, radar data, and enemy psychology simultaneously. Every decision was informed by experience, every calculation refined by years of rigorous practice. Mason and the F-22 pilots providing escort exchanged glances. They had trained with before, but witnessing her in action now, with real lives at stake, was different. "She's incredible," whispered. "She makes this look effortless." Mason nodded, tightening his grip on the controls. Shadow Hawk's guidance wasn't just competent, it was flawless. Enemy aircraft struggled to adjust to her predictions, forced into reactive maneuvers that had already anticipated. Each adjustment, she suggested, neutralized threats before they could even engage fully. The cabin of the transport remained tense but controlled. Its presence alone had transformed fear into action. Passengers, once distracted or indifferent, now watched her with growing respect and curiosity. One junior officer, still gripping his seat, muttered under his breath, "How can one person know so much?" Eyes flicked toward the crew subtly, scanning for signs of panic or fatigue. Every micro-expression, every shift in posture, informed her next instructions. Her analytical mind worked tirelessly, calculating human behavior as much as aircraft mechanics. In a brief lull between maneuvers, allowed herself a moment of internal reflection. Shadow Hawk wasn't just about skill, it was about responsibility. Each mission she undertook had required not only intellect but moral clarity. Lives depended on her judgment, and she bore that weight quietly, without complaint. It was a burden she had learned to carry from her earliest days in the Air Force. The call sign had become more than a title, it was a promise. To anticipate, to protect, and to act decisively when others hesitated. She thought of the missions that had earned her reputation. High-risk surveillance operations over hostile territories, complex airspace coordination exercises, emergency extractions, all of them had tested her limits. In each, her calm focus, precision timing, and tactical brilliance had been the difference between success and catastrophe. The pilots she had guided often assumed she was a silent observer, but Shadowhawk had always been the invisible strategist, quietly orchestrating every movement. That same skill now ensured the safety of every person aboard the transport. Outside, the sky remained clear, but new threats were never static. Enemy aircraft could appear from angles she had yet to calculate. Her mind moved ahead, predicting possible vectors and escape paths, integrating terrain, wind patterns, and aircraft capabilities into her analysis. She adjusted the transport's course subtly, never drawing attention, yet guiding it with unmatched accuracy. The F-22 pilots followed, instinctively trusting her commands. Shadowhawk's legacy was alive in every maneuver, in every decision, in every breath of precision. Mason glanced over the comms. "Shadowhawk, your call sign, it's not just a name. It's a legend," he said, voice tinged with awe, nodded in agreement, allowed herself the slightest smile, a gesture barely perceptible, acknowledging the respect without seeking it. Her focus returned immediately to the flight. The legacy of Shadowhawk was not vanity. It was the embodiment of skill, experience, and responsibility in action. Every passenger, every crew member, every pilot in the sky now relied on it, whether they knew it or not. As the transport continued through the high-altitude corridor, his eyes scanned the horizon. The immediate threat had lessened, but the potential for danger remained. Shadowhawk had transformed from a quiet passenger into the central figure controlling survival. Passengers now whispered her call sign with reverence, sensing for the first time the depth of her expertise. His calmness, combined with her legendary skill, had turned chaos into controlled strategy. Outside, enemy aircraft faltered, disrupted by the precision and foresight of the woman they could not see, but whose presence dominated every movement in the sky. In the brief silence, reflected again. Shadowhawk was more than a call sign. It was her past, her training, her countless hours of preparation distilled into decisive action. It was the invisible hand guiding both the transport and the F-22s through perilous airspace. And it was a reminder that true skill often arrived quietly, unnoticed until the moment it was needed most. Today, her legacy had saved lives, and it would continue to do so, unspoken, unassuming, and utterly effective. The hum of the transport's engines filled the cabin, a constant reminder of the altitude and speed at which they traveled. Eyes darted between her tablet and the instruments, analyzing the flight path while continuously monitoring radar readings. Enemy aircraft, regrouping from their earlier failed intercepts, were closing in again. Their speed had increased, and their formation was more aggressive. His mind moved faster than the instruments could relay, calculating trajectories, anticipating movements, and devising the next series of maneuvers with absolute precision. Every instruction she would give now could make the difference between survival and catastrophe. Adjust vector 10 degrees starboard, climb 2,000 feet. Maintain speed. F-22s take intercept positions, instructed calmly, her voice crisp over the comms. The crew followed without hesitation. Outside, Mason and in their F-22s executed her instructions flawlessly, forming a defensive perimeter around the transport. Each fighter jet mirrored her calculations, responding instantly to subtle adjustments in the transport's heading. Shadowhawk had become more than a passenger. She was the air commander, directing a ballet of high-speed aircraft with quiet authority. Passengers clutched their seats, some white-knuckled, some whispering in disbelief. One junior officer, barely able to comprehend the coordination unfolding before him, muttered, "I've never seen anything like this. She's controlling everything." Allowed herself no distraction. She was observing, calculating, anticipating. Her hands moved quickly across the tablet, recalculating enemy paths and predicting future maneuvers. Every micro-adjustment in the transport's tilt, altitude, and vector was designed to neutralize incoming threats without triggering panic among the passengers. Mason and were equally stunned. "She's not just predicting their moves, she's controlling them," Mason muttered into the headset. Nodded, eyes glued to the enemy blips on radar. The F-22 pilots had trained extensively in threat anticipation, but its ability to integrate live intelligence data, environmental factors, and human behavior in real time was unlike anything they had experienced. Shadow Hawk was not giving suggestions. She was orchestrating survival with flawless, surgical precision. One enemy craft broke formation and accelerated aggressively toward the transport. Eyes narrowed as she assessed its trajectory. Evasive maneuver, starboard tilt 5 degrees, descend 300 feet. Now, she commanded. The transport tilted gracefully, narrowly avoiding a potential lock-on. The enemy aircraft overshot, forced into an abrupt correction, its formation destabilized. The passengers gasped, some frozen in fear, whilst focus immediately shifted to the next threat. The room was tense, yet every command she issued reassured the crew that survival was possible. F-22s, intercept on my mark. Avoid direct engagement unless necessary. Use vectors 45 and 90 to channel them away from the transport, added. Mason and followed without hesitation, trusting every nuance of her calculations. Outside, the F-22s executed flawless maneuvers, blocking enemy aircraft and redirecting them into positions where they could be monitored without endangering the transport. Calm authority had transformed the chaos into coordinated strategy, a feat that even seasoned pilots recognized as extraordinary. Inside the cabin, the passengers were beginning to grasp the scale of what was unfolding. Its quiet presence, previously unnoticed, now radiated command. Her instructions were precise, her voice steady, her calculations unerring. One crew member whispered, "It's like she's everywhere at once, she sees everything." Eyes scanned micro-expression, subtle body language, and the rhythm of stress among the passengers. Every adjustment she made accounted for human reactions as much as enemy tactics. Her calm presence was contagious, subtly steadying the nerves of those around her. The enemy aircraft, disoriented by preemptive maneuvers, attempted to regroup, anticipated this immediately. Altitude plus 1,000 feet, vector 090. F-22s flank left and right to prevent regrouping. Maintain visual contact at all times. The pilots executed the maneuver, forming a protective wall around the transport. The enemy struggled to adjust, their precision falling short against predictive calculations. Each move she made was deliberate, a step ahead of the aggression, in defensive coordination. A sudden jolt rattled the transport as turbulence hit from shifting wind currents near a mountain ridge. Passengers gripped their seats tightly, some closing their eyes. Voice cut through, steady, minimal corrections, trust instruments and follow the heading exactly. Minor tilt adjustments only. The transport responded perfectly. Outside, the F-22s adjusted their vectors, protecting the craft while maintaining optimal spacing. Every element of the coordinated strategy, terrain, wind, enemy maneuvers, passenger safety, was accounted for simultaneously. Its ability to integrate every variable in real time was nothing short of extraordinary. The minutes dragged on, each one a test of endurance, precision, and nerves. The mind, however, remained razor-sharp, continuously recalculating potential threats and escape routes. Prepare for potential flanking attack from northwest quadrant. Adjust vector 12 degrees. Maintain altitude and speed, she instructed. Mason and responded immediately, forming a tight interception formation to protect the transport. The enemy craft, increasingly frustrated, faltered in their pursuit, unable to predict or counter the strategy Shadow Hawk had implemented. Finally, the immediate threat began to wane. Enemy aircraft, unable to gain an advantage, broke formation and retreated. Passengers exhaled collectively, some crying quietly from the adrenaline. Remained calm, though her mind continued running calculations, scanning for secondary threats. Mason and shared a brief, stunned glance over the comms. Shadow Hawk had not only guided the transport safely through imminent danger, she had orchestrated a tactical masterpiece, demonstrating courage, skill, and leadership in real time. As the transport leveled off, his eyes returned to the tablet. She made minor adjustments, maintaining course and preparing for potential follow-up threats. Passengers whispered her name in awe, Shadow Hawk. Her quiet presence had transformed panic into coordinated survival, her calm authority providing a lifeline in a situation that could have been disastrous. In that moment, was no longer a passenger. She was the orchestrator of life-saving strategy, a living embodiment of precision, courage, and unmatched tactical brilliance. The first hints of civilization appeared on the horizon, an airbase nestled in a broad valley, hangars glinting in the sunlight, runways stretching like ribbons across the tarmac. Maintained her focus on the instruments, guiding the transport with the same precision and calm that had saved it moments earlier. The passengers, once tense and anxious, now exchanged astonished glances, whispering in disbelief. The quiet woman in the corner, Shadow Hawk, had orchestrated their survival. Every maneuver, every calculation, every minute decision had prevented what could have been disaster. Now, for the first time, the relief was tangible. Captain Mason and Lieutenant followed closely in their F-22s, eyes scanning the skies, still cautious but increasingly confident. Over the comms, Mason's voice carried admiration. "Shadow Hawk, your calculations were flawless. We're tracking you in for landing, ready to escort." Added, "We've seen your reputation in exercises before, but this is different. You've just saved a lot of lives." Response was minimal, almost imperceptible. She allowed a faint nod, a small acknowledgement of recognition, then focused again on the approach. Shadow Hawk didn't need accolades, she needed precision. Inside the transport, passengers shifted in their seats, still gripping armrests, eyes wide with newfound respect. A few whispered among themselves, realizing they had been in the presence of someone extraordinary. One airman, voice trembling, said, "I didn't even know a single passenger could. I mean, she's incredible." Glanced at them subtly, her calm demeanor reassuring. She didn't speak more than necessary. Her focus remained on the approach, but her quiet authority had already left an impression. Shadow Hawk wasn't just a call sign. It was a standard of excellence, observed silently, executed flawlessly. As the transport descended toward the airbase, coordinated the landing with the same meticulous care she had shown in every maneuver. Maintain vector, reduce speed gradually. Watch crosswinds from the north. Touchdown in 30 seconds, she instructed. The crew perfectly, every adjustment smooth and precise. Outside, Mason and positioned their F-22s to shield the transport until it safely cleared the runway. Enemy threats had receded, but focus never wavered. She understood that precision in the final moments was just as crucial as during the high-risk maneuvers earlier in the flight. The wheels of the transport touched down lightly, the aircraft rolling along the tarmac with controlled ease. Passengers exhaled collectively, some crying quietly, some staring in awe at the cabin. Gaze never wavered from her instruments until the transport came to a complete stop. Then, only after ensuring the aircraft was secure, did she finally relax, allowing herself the slightest exhale. Shadow Hawk had guided them through chaos and danger with unmatched skill. She had turned fear into controlled survival and panic into strategic calm. Crew members and passengers filed out of the transport, still processing the intensity of what had just occurred. The reality of their survival was sinking in. Conversations were a mixture of relief and astonishment. "She did that?" one passenger asked, glancing back toward who quietly collected her gear. "One woman, she guided everything," another whispered. Offered a faint, polite smile to those who looked her way, but she did not seek recognition. The mission was over and her duty, quiet, invisible, and absolute, had been fulfilled. Outside, Mason and taxied their F-22s to the runway. Mason radioed, "Shadow Hawk, you're unbelievable. I've seen a lot in my career, but that was something else." Added, "We owe our lives and the lives of everyone aboard to you. Thank you." His acknowledgement was minimal, a nod, a slight upward tilt of her chin, but it was enough. The pilots had recognized the quiet hero among them. Shadow Hawk was no longer just a call sign. It was a legend in real time, earned under pressure, observed, and respected. As the passengers disembarked, some approached hesitantly, their expressions a mix of awe and gratitude. She responded with quiet courtesy, deflecting attention with minimal words. Shadowhawk's legacy was never about recognition, it was about results. Yet, in that moment, allowed herself a subtle sense of accomplishment. She had guided a transport through high-risk territory, orchestrated maneuvers with live enemy aircraft, and kept every person on board safe. Her expertise, calm authority, and tactical brilliance had turned potential disaster into flawless execution. After the passengers moved to secure areas, remained at the rear of the transport briefly, reviewing her tablet and flight logs. Mason and approached on foot, a respectful distance maintained, their eyes filled with admiration. "You're incredible," Mason said simply. Responded only with a faint smile, her mind already shifting to analysis of the flight, potential follow-up threats, and next steps. Shadowhawk didn't rest in celebration. She rested in readiness. The heroism was quiet, methodical, and precise, a reflection of her character and skill. As the sun climbed higher over the base, collected her gear, preparing to move on to the next assignment. Passengers and crew would tell stories of the quiet woman who had saved them, unaware of the depth of her training, her history, or the countless missions that had shaped her. Mason shared a private salute, a silent acknowledgement of skill, courage, and intelligence. Shadowhawk had emerged from obscurity in a single, breathtaking flight, earning recognition not through words, but through flawless action. The airbase buzzed with activity but remained a quiet figure, blending into the environment. Her work had been noticed, her skill respected, yet she moved forward without fanfare. Shadowhawk had transformed a routine flight into a tactical masterpiece, leaving a lasting impression on all who had witnessed it. In the eyes of the F-22 pilots and the transport crew, was no longer just a passenger. She was a hero, silent, precise, and unforgettable. Even as she walked away, preparing for future missions, the echoes of her call sign resonated. Shadowhawk, the quiet strategist, the unseen orchestrator, the embodiment of calm and courage under fire, had emerged. The legend of her skill would be whispered, observed, and remembered by those who had seen it firsthand. Unassuming yet extraordinary, had proven that true heroism often arrives quietly, appearing only when needed most, leaving awe and respect in its wake. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the airbase as the transport sat parked, its engines cooling. Stepped off the aircraft last, her presence quiet yet undeniably commanding. Around her, passengers and crew were still buzzing with disbelief and awe, recounting every moment of the flight with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. Shadowhawk, the call sign that had been whispered in training exercises and intelligence briefings, had become flesh and presence. Had transformed from a quiet, unassuming passenger into a living legend. Her calm precision and tactical brilliance forever etched into the memories of everyone aboard. Captain Mason approached, removing his helmet, his face taut with respect. "I've flown countless missions," he began, voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline, "but I've never seen anything like that. You didn't just save the flight, you controlled it. You turned chaos into an exact sequence of survival." Standing beside him, nodded in agreement. "Shadowhawk, it's not just a call sign anymore. It's a standard we'll remember, a standard of precision, focus, and courage." His expression remained calm, almost serene, but inside she allowed herself the tiniest acknowledgement of pride. The work had been difficult, but it had been executed flawlessly. The passengers, still visibly shaken, gathered near the transport. Conversations were hushed, full of reverence. One elderly passenger, voice quivering with emotion, said, "I thought we were done for, but she guided us every step. She saved us all." A young airman nodded vigorously, eyes wide. "I've never seen anyone handle that pressure with that calm. Shadowhawk, it's not a name, it's a force." Glanced around, offering a brief, polite smile, though her focus remained inward. She didn't need the praise. The lives saved were acknowledgement enough. Meanwhile, base personnel began their post-flight procedures, checking the aircraft and ensuring the safety of all passengers. Allowed them to work without interference, her attention still partly on her tablet, reviewing the flight log and debrief data. Every maneuver, every vector adjustment, every enemy path had been recorded and analyzed. Shadow Hawk wasn't just about instinct. It was about careful calculation and analysis, ensuring every action taken could be assessed and improved for future missions. Her mind, even in the calm after the storm, remained sharp, processing lessons learned and anticipating the next challenge. As walked toward the base operations building, Mason and fell in step beside her. The F-22 pilots were silent for a moment, each processing what had occurred in the air. "You've got nerves of steel," Mason finally said. "I've flown with some of the best, but you anticipate everything, every move before it happens, and you do it quietly. That's the hardest part, to command without drawing attention until it's too late to fail." Added, "You've earned the respect of everyone on this base today. And from me personally, Shadow Hawk, thank you. We owe you more than we can say." Smile remained faint, almost imperceptible. She had long learned that heroism wasn't about recognition. It was about responsibility, precision, and action when others hesitated. Shadow Hawk had always existed as a concept, a legend in simulations, in planning rooms, and in covert operations. Today, for the first time in her career, that legend had been witnessed in real life by civilians and combat pilots alike. And yet, knew the moment of triumph was only temporary. Threats existed everywhere, and Shadow Hawk would always need to be ready for the next call. Inside the operations building, was briefed on incoming intelligence, enemy movements, and potential risks to the region. The flight had been one engagement in a larger picture, and the threat hadn't disappeared completely. As she listened, her mind parsed information instantly, integrating it into actionable strategies. Her role as Shadow Hawk demanded not only courage and skill, but constant vigilance, analysis, and adaptation. The calm authority that had guided a transport through hostile skies moments earlier was the same clarity she applied to every mission. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep amber, the passengers and crew gathered in a quiet hangar for debrief and acknowledgement. Shadow Hawk was called forward, not for applause, but for a formal recognition of her actions. Military personnel spoke briefly, praising her composure, skill, and tactical brilliance. Passengers, still shaken by the intensity of the flight, offered personal thanks, accepted their words with humility. For her, recognition was not the goal. Survival was the goal. Precision and calm under fire were the tools, and today those tools had saved lives. In a quiet moment after the formalities, stepped outside to watch the sun fully disappear behind distant ridges. Mason and joined her, leaning on the edge of the tarmac. "I can't stop thinking about it," Mason admitted. "You made the impossible look effortless." Nodded. "Shadow Hawk, you're calm under pressure. It's almost supernatural. I hope I get to fly with you again someday." Only nodded lightly, appreciating their words but knowing her focus would return to duty soon. Shadow Hawk never rested in celebration. She rested in readiness. As darkness fell over the base, his figure remained a solitary, quiet presence. The aircraft behind her, the runway stretching into shadows, and the faint hum of F-22 engines in the distance painted a cinematic picture of resolve and courage. She had entered this flight as a quiet passenger, unnoticed and underestimated. She had emerged as Shadow Hawk, the orchestrator of survival, the calm in chaos, the strategist whose decisions had saved dozens of lives. And though the passengers, pilots, and crew would never forget this flight, knew the call of duty was eternal. Shadow Hawk's legacy was now more than just a name. It was a symbol of precision, skill, and courage under pressure. Had proven that quiet determination, analytical brilliance, and unwavering focus could alter the course of events in real time, transforming panic into controlled survival. And while recognition and gratitude were fleeting, the impact of her actions would be remembered, studied, and revered. In the skies above, and in the hearts of those she saved, Shadow Hawk would never be forgotten. As she turned toward the base's secure quarters, his eyes reflected calm determination. The mission was over, but the work was never finished. Shadow Hawk had emerged from anonymity, saving lives, commanding respect, and leaving a legacy that would endure far beyond this flight. Quiet, precise, and extraordinary, walked forward, ready for the next call, the next challenge, and the next opportunity to demonstrate that true heroism often arrives quietly, unseen, yet unmistakably powerful.